Hello everyone. My name is Nathaniel Antaresta Purwanto. In this opportunity, I will deliver my thesis about corporate social responsibility on the global stage, a legitimacy examination in emerging markets. First of all, I will start with the background problems of my thesis. Globalization and liberalization of markets have caused many business firms to internationalize their operations. However, the mainstreamness of internationalization also questions how these firms could be held accountable and responsible for their stakeholders, society, and environment in the market they operate. In realizing their international presence, EMNs face multiple challenges, namely liability of foreignness and liability of emergingness. These liabilities create a hardened condition in attaining legitimacy from host market stakeholders, as EMNs are perceived to be rooted in institutional voids. As a result, EMNs must conduct a comprehensive and thorough strategy to eliminate these liabilities to further gain legitimacy from external stakeholders that integrate sustainability. So there are some number of research gap between my thesis with the previous research that have been studied. The first one is that the previous research, I suggest that the previous research are lacking of research in some scope of context. Prior research of CSR in emerging markets was predominantly focused on China's firms. This thesis will be differed by focusing more on Asian EMNs, particularly from Southeast Asian biggest economy that in the recent years show a promising growth that will likely to yield valuable and new insights on the CSR literatures that predominantly was conducted in Western countries. The second research gap is I offer a new perspective towards prior research. The previous studies have shed light on whether stronger regulation of the host market will support the relationship between CSR and internationalization. In this study, I offer a new moderating effect of host market development that significantly emphasize the global level country risk classification and the difference between internationalization effort to both develop and less developed host countries. So this thesis will contribute the previous studies by collectively collaborating each of elements previously studied while establishing a new perspective that emphasizes the role of stakeholder legitimacy from various stakeholders across countries that are both culturally and institutionally distant. So there are three main contributions of my thesis. The first one is the different view of theoretical framework, which I will be focused on the legitimacy theory based on the stakeholder theory. The second one is I offer a new scope of countries being studied. As I mentioned earlier, I will be focusing on Southeast Asian biggest economy. And the third one is I will extend the moderating variables, which will be explained in the further page. So the research question of my thesis will be, how does stakeholder theory explain the relationship between CSR and internationalization, particularly in emerging markets, with host market development level and state ownership as moderating variables? So in order to come up with the hypothesis, the first hypothesis in this term, there are some theoretical backgrounds that I already collected and examined. As EMN is seeking to internationalize, must both navigate external and internal pressure for legitimacy and conformity to sustain a competitive advantage. A firm needs legitimacy tools to overcome these barriers. The process of obtaining legitimacy and gaining acceptance from stakeholders is a continuous and complex process. And corporate social responsibility, or CSR, has been widely used as a means to obtain legitimacy and overcome liabilities and barriers to legitimacy. Therefore, it is posited that engagement in corporate social responsibility initiatives provides EMNEs with a robust strategy for establishing legitimacy among external stakeholders. This enhanced legitimacy subsequently facilitates greater acceptance and paves the way for further international presence. Thus, the first hypothesis will be EMNE CSR scores will positively influence scope of internationalization. In the second hypothesis, as the regulatory and acceptance landscape for foreign business in a host country is notably shaped by the host development status, EMNs are targeting multiple locations with different degrees of conditions, and also dissimilarities between stakeholders' value may influence legitimacy and acceptance criteria for foreign business, suggesting that the values and expectations of different stakeholders can significantly impact the legitimacy of foreign business. As a result, host market instrument of development may affect the difficulty to obtain legitimacy that further influence EM and its acceptance to enter the market. Thus, I expect that the host market development level will moderate the relationship between CSR and internationalization. Thus, the second hypothesis will be the host country development level positively moderates the relationship between CSR and internationalization. Finally, the third hypothesis, the theoretical background is that in this current global business, emerging SOEs often have easier access to obtaining legitimacy in a new environment. It is because that state-owned enterprise or SOE have heavily invested in legitimacy and trust building through engagement in corporate political strategies and corporate social responsibility reporting in order to obtain positive public perception. In practice, they also considered to be advantageous because of the ascribed status. They may be advantageous from the reduced political risk in the international landscape due to their close ties with the government, which can provide diplomatic support. State-owned EMNs is also less sensitive to host country political risk, and they have abundant treasury resources for financial backing, which makes them get easier access to local banks and financial markets. Thus, the third hypothesis will be state ownership positively affect the relationship between CSR and internationalization. So after we collected some hypotheses from the previous slides, I came up with this conceptual model that described the relationship between each variables that create three hypotheses. So we can see here the first hypothesis described the relationship between CSR and scope of internationalization. And I suggest and I expect this relationship to be a positive value. I also add the moderating variables of host market development level and also the state ownership that will be moderate the relationship of CSR and scope of internationalization. I also expect these two moderating variables to create a positive relationship to this CSR and internationalization relationship. So before we further investigate the connection and the relationship between the variables, in this slide, I will explain the variables and the definition of each elements in the conceptual model. The first one is the dependent variable. The dependent variable being used in this thesis is the scope of internationalization. This variable will be measured as the number of foreign subsidiaries where EMNs operate. This number will be examined manually by collecting data from firms' latest annual reports, which will be equalized in 2022. Moving on to the independent variable, the main independent variable is the EMNE CSR. To obtain this information, I operationalized Thomson Reuters Econ Corporate Social Performance or CSP indicator. This measurement is well grounded on the three pillars, namely environmental, social, and governance performance. As I mentioned before, the moderating variable will be state ownership and host market development level. State ownership will be examined in the ownership structure of the firm. If the firm is owned above of 50% by the government, it will be categorized as state-owned enterprise. On the other hand, the host market development level will be measured by the categorization issued by Economic Cooperation and Development or OECD in 2022. This categorization is issued by the OECD to categorize the national risk between countries and shows a level between 1 to 3, with level 1 indicates that the country have a low national political risk and other elements of risk. Finally, the control variable, I control three main control variable, which is the firm size, firm age, and firm industry. These controlled variables have been argued to impact the internationalization of emerging firm in the past. So before we further investigate, the methodology of this thesis will be using and grounding in the quantitative approach. The reason is because the measurement and the variable contains a numerical figures which will be tested using the statistical method. We also be using the regression analysis and the ordinary least square regression to test the relationship between each dependent variable and one or more independent variables. It also used to examine the linear relationship between the variables. And finally, we will be using Stata 18.0. And to ensure the causality, the dependent variable will be lagged by 1 year. So after we collect the data and test using the statistical tools, we came up to the result with the hypothesis 1 shows a positive result that is accepted, while the hypothesis 2 shows a second hypothesis is rejected. The moderating effect of host market development in this hypothesis 2 that is shown by the ESGX host development was not evidenced due to the insignificant result. On the other hand, the third hypothesis, it implies that firms with more foreign subsidiaries in developed countries tend to have higher internationalization. Moreover, the interaction terms of ESGX or SOE that indicate the moderating effect of state ownership shows a statistically insignificant result. Thus, the third hypothesis is rejected. After we came up to the result, I collect the data to make the conclusion of this thesis. The conclusion includes the implications for practice and the implication for theory. I will start first by the implication for practice. Based on the result, it is evident that CSR positively influence the internationalization scope of EMNs. Therefore, continuous monitoring and adapting of CSR strategies and acknowledgement of the dynamic nature of a country stakeholder management are crucial of success. However, it is imperative for EMNs to adopt a diversified approach to strategy development extending beyond gaining legitimacy through CSR. This strategy could be corporate political activity or CPA. Additionally, in the face of inconclusive evidence regarding the moderating effect of state ownership and host market development level, EMNS managers should explore other relevant factors that might better explain the relationship, such as industry-specific conditions, political connections, or global networks. In the implications for theory, my research provides a comprehensive theoretical background which is highly relevant to EMNs and their use of CSR in the global stage by focusing on emerging markets. The findings provide nuanced insights into the role of CSR in internationalization strategies of EMNs and the potential moderating effects of contextual factors such as a host country development level and state ownership. The implication for stakeholder theory highlights the complex interplay between CSR, organizational legitimacy, and internationalization, calling for a more integrative and context-sensitive approach to understanding firm behavior in global markets. Finally, there are some limitations and also some recommendations for the further research. As my sample thesis only consists of a small number of samples of 120 samples, my recommendation for the future research is to broaden the sample scope in order to increase the validity and the reliability of the result. I also recommend for future research to incorporate different measurement. It includes the measurement of the variables, such as the CSR, as it is manually delivered by the companies to the organization. So the numbers might be biased. So it is recommended to incorporate different measurement in the future research. My final recommendation for future research is to add other relevant control variables. It might be includes the control variables in the global level, such as the GDP per capita or the GDP level of a host market or the home market. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention and see you soon in any other opportunity. Thank you. Bye.